Welcome, everyone, to our second chat of the year. We are so excited here to have Emma. Thank you so much for joining us. We met Emma at the Austin Grand Prix, and she was working at the ESPN activation in the paddock. No, she doesn't work for ESPN, but she'll get into everything very shortly. She wears so many hats, as so many women and so many of our guests do. She's a marketing coordinator for Race Service. It's probably a name that's very familiar to many in the motorsport industry and who engage in motorsport. And then we're joined by Maureen. Maureen won our fantasy F1 last year, and we're bringing her on. She's streaming live from London, and we are so excited to have you. So welcome. Good morning. Emma, why don't you share with everyone what you were doing at the Austin Grand Prix and who you were actually there with and what you were doing, and just a little bit about yourself and where you're streaming from.
Yeah, so I guess quick intro for me directly. My name is Emma Elsbecker. I am a current student at Dartmouth College studying motorsports marketing and then also working full-time with Race Service as a marketing coordinator. So normally I'm living from New Hampshire, but commuted to Los Angeles for this week. So I am currently in the Race Service garage. If you hear noises, it's because there's NASCARs being transported all around me. We are in LA for the week for the NASCAR Clash. So hopefully there's not too much background noise, but there's definitely memorabilia all around me, from NASCARs to Daniel race suits, helmets, everything you can imagine. In terms of my job and my work with Race Service, if you haven't heard of Race Service yet, we are a content creation and marketing agency behind a lot of the activations and content that you see primarily in the F1 paddock, but increasingly across IndyCar, NASCAR, just kind of the automotive industry in general. So with ESPN specifically, you may have noticed the last 3 domestic races. They've done crossover kind of sport content within the paddock, first with the NBA in Austin, then with the Miami Dolphins for the Miami Grand Prix, and then again with the PGA in Austin. And so they come to Race Service to help them put together those activations and capture content. So me specifically in Austin, I was working with Race Service and ESPN to kind of manage how the activation came together, from sourcing the tent to the simulator, making sure we had golf balls there, keeping our production crew ready, making sure that they were capturing content, getting that content from our cameras to Pierre Gasly if he wanted to post, stuff like that.
That's awesome. And then I know you're also doing work at Dartmouth and doing some related but also unrelated work there. So can you also explain a little bit about how you got into that and maybe how those two worlds match?
Yeah, so at Dartmouth, my technical full major is quantitative social science. So I basically spend a lot of time programming and using stats to do research. So my senior honors thesis is kind of, I crudely call it the drive to survive effect. It's much bigger than that, but it really is a deep statistical analysis stringing from the start of the Liberty Media buyout to our current fan base of how this new wave of Liberty Media, drive to survive, and kind of social media has radically changed Formula One and the economics around it, from the perspective of viewership numbers, what it's like for businesses wanting to invest, and even how it's changed the lives of drivers and how they interact when it comes to social media, building their own brand, that kind of deal. So it's definitely informed by the work that I love to do at Race Service, and it's largely helped by the connections that I've made through Race Service. But it basically means that I spend all day either talking to clients for work or researching that client for my thesis. And I discovered that my freshman year in college, I would say. I had been math averse for years, thought that I couldn't do math, couldn't code, was in an intro statistics class and realized that I loved it. I was doing research in government about actually clothing choices for female politicians. I wrote this research paper called "These Suits Were Made for Running," all about sartorial choices and how it affected political outcomes. And then the more and more that I fell out of love with government, the more that I fell in love with sports. And I knew that I wanted to do some sports research about DE&I. So I started with research about the LPGA, and now I'm kind of in my favorite spot doing research about the sport that I love and also what I work in.
That's amazing. And something that you just mentioned that I think a lot of people maybe get nervous about or don't know how to navigate is transitioning industries like that, right? So if you spend so much time focusing on one niche, one vertical, something that you think you're passionate about for so long, and then you decide, you find something else that you love, or you decide that, okay, maybe this wasn't right for me and I want to do something else. Can you walk us through a little bit like what experience was like just for you to kind of pick up and change, and if that was hard for you?
Yeah.
And I wanted to just add in, like, Emma, when we chatted, you said something, so usually with Grid Clique, when we chatted, we host pre-interviews just to get more information and nuggets from our interviewees. But when Emma and I chatted, she said something incredibly impactful that if I had heard this when I was going through college or university, I think would have helped a lot. But you said college is about shopping around. So I think this really helps and like adds addition to what Sarah was asking. So if you can expand on that, I think it's awesome.
I preface this by saying I'm only 20, but I think I've lived a lot in those 20 years. So I can remember being, 6, 7, 8 years old, being with my grandma who was super into politics, watching CNN, knowing that I wanted to work in government. And all throughout middle school, high school, was taking every government, every politics, every history class that I could, was doing speech and debate, and had very firmly put myself on the vertical of wanting to work in government. So I was working on campaigns. I interned for the Arizona Secretary of State, who is now Governor Katie Hobbs. And that's all that I ever really let myself know. It was the safe avenue. I knew how to do it. I knew what the vertical was. And then I think, like a lot of people, COVID hit. I spent a lot of time at home, a lot of time watching the news, working in government, and just had this deep-rooted feeling that, I wasn't waking up at 5 a.m. to go into work energized about it. It felt like work. It felt heavy. And even in the classes that I was taking, I took a senior lecture series my freshman year, which I don't know why they let me do that, thinking that was going to be the pinnacle of government education at Dartmouth. And it was entirely based on theory and case studies, and it was nothing hands-on. And I sat down with my government professor at the time, and I said, I'm struggling because I thought what I wanted to do was fix these problems in government. And, I'm not learning how to do that. I'm not applying that here at Dartmouth. And he kind of pushed me to be like, I don't know if what you want to do is government. I think that's what you've known. And I think now is the time. You're 18 years old. I had only taken like 6 classes at that point. Go take a bunch of random classes. And I did. I shopped around for my freshman year. That's the first time that I really got into doing that political research. And so I started to realize I really like being around the numbers. I like feeling like I'm solving a problem by applying coding and statistics and things like that. And then the real turning point was when I was signing up for classes. Basically this time last year, I signed up for a sports analytics class. And my siblings had been, they played athletics all throughout college. I had always watched athletics growing up. And so I thought, why not? I like sports. Let me see what it's like to study sports analytics. And during that class, this is getting like super niche. During that class, we had a presenter come in who had taken that class at Dartmouth, had gone to work in consulting, but had always kept a side blog on the side about hockey. And he said, it took me 5 years, but I finally made my way to the career that I wanted. And that stuck with me. And the day after that lecture, I went home and I started my blog, Formula One Nation. And it was about 3 months from hearing that lecture to sending my first email to my boss, Jacob, saying that I so desperately wanted to work with his company. And that was the kick that I needed, was a government professor saying, you could do this, but I don't think you want to do this. And then a previous, a Dartmouth alumni saying he had went for his safe career choice. He went for consulting, had always loved hockey, and ended up in that career in the end. So that's how I kind of made the gradual shift over. And I think I'm lucky to have done it so early that I didn't really have to fear about changing jobs or anything like that. But I will say the biggest story or inspiration that I had in having the confidence to question what I was doing in the first place was my mom, which is like so stereotypical to say, but she was a public school teacher for, I think, almost 20 years, and went back to school to get her master's degree in her 40s, and totally changed careers and went from being a public school teacher to being a family counselor for families going through addiction, and just entirely uprooted her life because she felt a calling to, help people to a greater extent than beyond the classroom. And so seeing that modeled in my life definitely gave me the confidence to question if I wanted to study government and then be pushed out of that comfort zone.
And I think that that's such an important conversation to talk about, is like, you can always change what you're doing. Like, yes, you're on the younger side and you're still in this very much so experimental phase, but I talk to people, I'm 27, I talk to people my age that are like, I don't like what I'm doing, I don't know what to do, but I feel so uncomfortable picking myself up and going after something that I love to do. And I think that it's such a hard conversation, especially as even having this conversation with my friend Cassidy the other day about, the parental expectations of you go into a field that maybe they don't understand, or like, for example, I did not grow up in a racing family. My parents, when I tell them I'm going to races, they're like, what are you talking about? And just like, don't get it. So, right. It's like, there's so many societal expectations, parental expectations, like, for you to choose the right path for you, but also to be successful in it. And I think that you being the person to just pick up and not only make that change, but have the drive to do that, do the things that you need to do in order to get there. So cold email some guy from race service that you really wanted to work for and like kind of throw your name in a hat. I think that takes a lot of guts, and even just I myself find that I'm inspired by that. So that's incredible.
I'll throw in a funny story if I can really quick about, I think my parents were always supportive, but I don't know if they fully understood what I was doing at first. And I think we had a turning point this week. I grew up watching some NASCAR races with my dad. He's like a fan, but he's not a fan like I have grown to be with Formula One. And we were just at race service this week, and I was working with Tyler Reddick and his manager. And his manager, Chris, said, Emma, how did you end up in motorsport? Like, you don't seem like the typical person that would be working in motorsports. And I said, well, if you want the long story, it was sitting on the couch with my dad and watching NASCAR. And without being prompted, he turned around and he goes, hey, does your dad want to go to the Phoenix race as Tyler Reddick's guest? I said, I don't know. Let me call my dad. And so I called my dad and I said, hey, how would you feel about going to the Phoenix race in, a month and a half as Tyler Reddick's guest? I could get you 2 tickets. And he paused and then he went, I think that would be a lot of fun. He just was this turning point where he goes, I realized for the first time that you know people and, you're making connections where like I'm getting to go to races because my daughter works in NASCAR. And even last night I was working with this amazing woman in NASCAR named Amy Anderson, who is the director of NASCAR Digital and does all of their social media strategy. And she was texting me asking what size I wanted in the Clash merch. And she said, oh, and what does your dad wear? Because we're going to send him a box. And like my dad has become, I feel like, more popular than I have at work. He's like the origin story. But I think that was this turning point for him in understanding like Emma's not just sitting at a computer plugging in numbers. Like she's working with clients who care enough about her to bring me to a race. So I feel like they're starting to at least reap the benefits of what I'm doing, or my dad at least. My mom has started to watch Drive to Survive. The extent of her knowledge, I think, is that she really likes Alex Albon. But I mean, don't we all?
That's amazing. I mean, Alex is definitely someone that we love, and especially all the content that's come out with Alex and Lily this week too, from our friend Lydia at Park for May, who's also a race service alum.
She is. Lydia and I have crossed so close to being in the same place and working on the same project, and it hasn't happened yet. And each time it's a near miss, I text Lydia and I'm so bummed. We're fingers crossed for Miami. But she was with the race service crew shooting the Red Bull launch a few days ago. And I was texting everybody who was there, basically being like, tell Lydia that I miss her and I wish I was there. But yeah, she was one of the first women that really came through RS. And Jacob always tells a story about how much she grew and just totally blossomed while being here. And that was kind of like a personal goal for me, was like, do what Lydia has done in 3 months of being at race service.
Wow. Yeah. If anyone who's watching doesn't follow Lydia's work, she's Lydia Harper at Park for May on Instagram. I want to quickly circle back to something that you were mentioning earlier, is the cycle that it took your family or your father to kind of realize what you were doing, especially at such a young age. What was that experience like, telling them like, hey, I'm going to go fly to LA and go work for this company while I'm doing studies, and that's just going to happen? Like, and then also, how do you juggle that? You were saying that it's midterms now or something, and like you're in LA now, but then you have to go back to New Hampshire for school.
Yeah, I think my family has gotten kind of used to me, not, I wouldn't say being impulsive, but being pretty independent and wanting to do things. I have this memory of being 16, and I say that like it was super long. It was 4 years ago. And seeing this study abroad program in France. And I told my parents, I was like, I want to apply for this. It's this free foreign exchange program. You go and live in France for the summer. And they agreed to let me apply because I was like, it's not like I'm going to get it. It's not like I'm going to be, the one girl chosen from Arizona to get to go to France, because they were super uncomfortable with it. I mean, how do you get comfortable with the idea of sending your 15 or 16-year-old daughter to live with a host family in a country that you don't know, you don't speak the language? And I got the program, and I went to France for 4 months. My parents, they said their biggest lesson learned then was to never trust when I say it's not like I'm going to get it. Because I did the same thing 2 years later. I got an opportunity to go to China, actually to Chengdu, which is a province really close to Wuhan, about 3 weeks before COVID happened. So it's not like I'm going to get to go do this China trip, and then I went and I did it. So they're kind of well versed in me throwing things their way that they're not expecting or they're not used to. I think this was a big one when I decided that I was going to leave government and start through the sports analytics class. But they've always been fully behind me. I think there's other members of my family who are maybe hoping I'd, be a lawyer or do something like that. But once they saw me in Austin or doing other big things like that, I think in general they came around. But the process is definitely challenging. When I told them that I was going to fly to LA, I think they thought I was crazy. I mean, the process of that, I think Jacob is on this stream, but I emailed Jacob at midnight on the East Coast. I just need to remember this, midnight on like May 5th or something. Oh, full cover letter, full resume. And just said, I don't know if you take interns. I really want to intern for your company. And I think I told you this story, Sam. I went to sleep. I normally sleep super heavy. Randomly woke up 30 minutes in, rolled over and thought, I guess I'm going to check my email, and had gotten a response from Jacob exactly 30 minutes later. And he was like, can you do a Zoom call? I did a Zoom call, and I think a week and a half later, I was flying out to LA for literally 8 hours just to do a group interview with everybody at Race Service. And it was probably crazier than going to France or going to China. I was like, I'm just going to go meet this random company and, stay in their office all day. But I think what you learn about Race Service is you walk into this space and it's such a magnetic pull when you walk in. I mean, you're surrounded by history. I like to say that I feel like I work in a museum with the helmets and the suits and everything around me. And it really is a family. Even when I, moved to LA, I was living with 2 people who work at Race Service who I didn't know. And they immediately took me in, and they immediately were like family. So it's scary. And I definitely had moments where I was like, am I doing this? Is this the right thing for me to do? And my mom always talks about safe risks. And so pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, not in a way where you're risking, harm or anything like that. And she said, this is a safe risk. This is your 20. You're supposed to be shopping around and trying new jobs. It's a $200 United flight. Go to LA, see what it's like. If you don't like it, no harm, no foul. But this is when you should be doing crazy things like that.
And on that note, obviously you've taken a lot of risks, safe or not. What keeps you inspired in those moments when you're able to maybe not see that this is in fact a safe risk, but it's something that you feel you need to do?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think, again, I've been so lucky to work so early with a company like Race Service that is so fundamentally founded in the belief that we can change the status quo of motorsport. So I think there's a lot of times when, maybe I get stuck over the small details of an activation, or I get worked up about, okay, we're 30 minutes behind production schedule, the client's going to get mad. And then I kind of have those moments where I have to pull myself out and think about, especially what our 2 founders, Jacob and James, would say in that moment, right? Like, what we're doing with NASCAR isn't about getting a good photo of Tyler Reddick for his Instagram. It is about broadening, the fan base of NASCAR throughout America and bringing it to new fans and revitalizing who is a NASCAR fan and making it more accessible. And so I think I kind of have to take those moments to step back and think about the broader goal, and don't get caught up in all the small details, because if you have a broader understanding of what you're going to do, it all kind of fades away in the wash. It's like when we were in Austin, I look back, there was this night, I think it was Wednesday night before media day on Thursday, where we were in the paddock until 2 a.m. placing plants at the activation, and I was like vacuuming AstroTurf. And in the moment I was like, this is insane. Why am I doing this? And then you have that recognition moment of you come into the paddock the next day, and I had this like shell-shocked, I'm here. I never thought I'd be in the paddock, right? I started this journey, 10 months ago, of thinking that I wanted to work in Formula One. And yeah, I spent last night on my hands and knees picking fuzz off of AstroTurf. And now I'm here and I'm watching these drivers come through this thing that I've helped build with my team. And it's definitely worth it. I will say, I remember earlier you asked how I balance it, and I glossed over that. Not well, but it's the inspiration of things like this that push you forward when it comes to balancing. So there's days when, maybe I'm on the East Coast and I've gone through 6 hours of class that day. And the last thing I want to do is sit down and go through making a deck. And then I have to pull back and realize, okay, if I'm sitting at Le Mans in 6 months, it's going to be worth staying up for 30 minutes and being grumpy and pushing myself to think harder. And so I think, like I said, it's just being grounded in the moment. And Jacob is really good at helping with, and when it comes to something like writing social for a post, it's easy to fall into the habits of how to make your job easier. So using the same verbiage, not pushing yourself to think critically. And Jacob and the rest of the team is really good at those moments of kind of snapping you out of it, saying like, okay, each person on our team is gifted in a specific way. If you're really good at journalistic copywriting, then you have to dig down. You're tired, you're over it, you're a little bit burnt out, but you can do it. And it's those moments when your team pushes you that you feel that spark come back to life.
Yeah, and I think that you point out something super, super important, which is, again, that power of community and having people around you that drive you to continue doing what you're doing. I mean, there's definitely days that Samantha and I are the same. We both have full-time jobs. So does Melissa, and we're working 7 to 8, 7 to 9, and we're having crazy schedules. And then at night we have a call at like 8 o'clock every week, and we're like, every week we're like, oh God, do we have to do this? And as soon as we're on, we're like, oh yeah, like this is why, like revitalizes us. We come back to like, okay, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And I think it's, again, having those people surrounding you to kind of like sometimes remind you that, because there's so many things in life that can bog you down. You can get overwhelmed, especially if you're learning a lot of new things for the first time, if you're doing a lot of things that are out of your comfort zone. So I just wanted to thank Samantha and Melissa right here for being that for me as well.
I think it's also what you identified, Emma. It's like, you're doing something you love. Like, Sarah says, like, we get energized by that. Like, after this call, I'm going to start editing, this chat. I'm going to start video editing Steph Turner's chat from last week. And part of me is like, ugh, I just want to lie on the couch and just like be a couch. But like, you start getting into it, and you're like, like 3 hours will go by, and I'm like, oh, like, you're like, this is why I do this, because I enjoy it so much. And like, it's the same thing with the chat. So I think you have those moments and you're like, I'm at Le Mans, or, I'm here in LA, and it's so incredibly cool and inspiring. And I think it's like, not many people get to work in the space that they really enjoy. Mm-hmm. But I think this is like a lot of what's coming out of what you're saying is also like, find what you like and like do that as a hobby too. And it'll actually make you a better employee in your day job, or a better person. And I tell Sarah and Melissa this all the time. I feel like I go back to work a better employee, because I'm like, I'm so inspired, and I have all these, I get rejuvenated, which I think is a really important. I think a lot of people forget that, like, they want to work in something they love. And it's like, it's hard sometimes to do that immediately, but it's like, it makes you a better person to just engage in what you like.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, and we always talk about this at RS, what we do isn't work. It doesn't feel like work. I think it's, not sure if I'm allowed to curse on this, but we just say like, we make cool shit with our friends, and that's our job. Like Jacob would say this time and time again, is make cool shit with our friends and have fun doing it. And when you approach work with that motto, that's one of the things that helps the stress and the worry just kind of slip right off of your back. Is, yeah, you're stressed about it, but when you look around, you're literally hanging out with your friends at the racetrack all day. Like how bad can it be? I mean, even coming out to LA this week, I was so drained and so tired. I had spent all of last week finishing all of my work that's due for this week. So I had been pulling nights, like 4 hours of sleep. I flew for like 8 hours, landed in LA at 1 p.m. and then came straight to RS and stayed here until 10. And there was a part of me when I first landed that was like, I just want to go to my hotel and go to sleep and not do work. This is crazy. And then I walked in and like straight walked into the gate. James Kirkham was standing right there and grabbed me and gave me the biggest hug and was like, "You're home. We're so happy to have you." And everybody reacted like that. And I think it's when you have that mindset of like, I'm coming home, I'm coming to my family. It makes it worth it. And now I'm like, oh my God, I have to go back to New Hampshire. How am I going to do that? I just want to stay here with the team.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I have those moments all the time. And something that you also just mentioned that I thought of is I think a lot of people are almost nervous to try to forge a career in something that they love because they're scared of turning what they love into a job in which that they would resent it. And so when you said we just do cool shit with our friends, I think that that's obviously the goal with a lot of people who want to work in something that they love are scared that that's not going to be the case. So can you share a bit more about that? And then also specifically, like, were there certain projects that you worked on or certain things that you've done at RS that kind of made you realize like, this really isn't work, even though I feel burnt out sometimes, or even though I get super tired, even if I'm picking fuzz off of turf at 2:00 in the morning, right? Like what sorts of projects have you worked on that are like that moment in the paddock that set you back and make you remember that?
Also, I want to add, like, it's so funny that you said, like, I think we've all had that picking off fluff off AstroTurf parts of our careers that we're just like, what am I doing? Where is this going? But then you're like at the Austin Grand Prix. So I think those moments, look back at it, you're like, oh yeah, I get it.
Oh yeah. I have to like the broader story of that picking fuzz off AstroTurf. When you guys were in Austin, it was super windy in the paddock. I spent all weekend doing that. But there's a very specific moment. It was caught on camera by one of our videographers the morning of Austin. Everybody's pulling into the paddock. It's Thursday morning, so it's like, I don't know, 9 a.m. All the teams are showing up. And I had lip gloss on and my hair was blowing into my face and it was sticking on my lips. And I was like awkwardly bent over with a vacuum. Like there was nothing graceful or good about that moment. It was like the most grunt work. And we were at the very end of the paddock near kind of like the media entrance. Not a lot of drivers would sneak through there, but somebody was walking through. There's all these photographers following him. And I looked up and I looked so dumb in that moment. My mouth was like hanging open. I looked up. I was like, why does that guy look so familiar? And we're making intense eye contact. Like we're staring at each other as he's walking by. And I'm like bent over vacuuming and I look up and it clicks. I'm like, oh, it's Christian Horner. This is a good start to my morning. And then I was like, okay, make a fool of yourself in front of Christian Horner. Check. Like, I guess everybody has to do it in the paddock at some point. But yeah, that's like my extension onto that story in terms of what projects make it feel like we're just doing cool shit with our friends and how do you keep that motivation? I think we're lucky at Race Service that we have so many cool and new projects that come in every day. So, it's never boring. There's always something new coming in. There's always a new challenge, whether it's a new team that we're working with, a new driver, a new racing series entirely. There's always something new. I think the biggest ones for me that I can think of from the past, one of the first big projects that I got to work on that wasn't like cleaning up our back room or organizing our merchandise was a launch party for Daniel Ricciardo's latest wine blend called Rick Red. And I got on that project. We have weekly team meetings every Monday from like 10 to 11, 10 to 12 some weeks, where we just talk about every new and incoming project. And that got pitched, or it was brought up at the meeting like, hey, heads up on, I think it was like October 13th, Daniel's coming through to launch his new Rick Red blend. And that's also one of the things that you learn at Race Service is people would say Daniel, and I would have this double take moment of like, talking about Daniel Ricciardo? And then you're like, yes, Daniel is Daniel Ricciardo. And I put my hand up in the meeting and I said, hey, if there's any room on that project, I really want to work on it. And they were like, oh, okay, sure. And, Emma can jump in on that. And that week we were doing 3 things. We were doing Daniel's launch party. We were doing a shoot with EA Games, so all of the kind of promo that you saw about the Ricardo Challenge and all of that stuff that was filmed in RS with Derwin James and Pat Bev. And we were prepping to go to Austin the next week. And it was this kind of flip that switch to putting my hand up for the first time, went from doing kind of the intern grunt work that we all have to do and we all should do, to being on not one, but 3 projects simultaneously with F1 drivers in a way that I never thought would happen. And so that was a huge turning moment, working that Rick Red party, meeting Daniel and his team for the first time was huge. And then, of course, always going to the paddock, that was, I mean, we had a big team. We had about 10 people there. We were split in half. About 7 of them were going to shoot with Sebastian Vettel for Aston Martin. If you've seen the video of Sebastian kind of doing donuts on a dirt track with a 707, that was filmed and edited by our team. And then a smaller cohort, just myself, Jacob, and Nick, another European account exec from our team, were working on the ESPN activation in the paddock. So we had been in Austin for an hour, and they decided that we were going to go straight to the track. And they threw it to me as like, we've been here before. This isn't new to us. We're going to bring you to the paddock tonight, and you just get to walk it and have your first experience in the paddock. And there was literally nobody there. It was in the middle of setup. And they like walked me out to the track for the first time. And I had this like gobsmacked moment of, oh my God, I'm here. And that was just like the craziest run of a week in my life of, this is not work. This will never feel like work. I went from throwing a party with a bunch of other producers for Daniel Ricciardo, meeting Daniel, being on a shoot with EA Games, flying out to Austin. I'm standing in the middle of the paddock. So, I mean, those were the 2 really, really early projects that I got to do that just really cemented it for me that as long as I stay focused, again, on this motto of making cool shit with my friends, it was never going to feel like work. It could be hard and it could be tiring, but I had to have those moments of reflection and being so incredibly grateful that there are so many people who would want to work in this industry right now, that I never try to let myself get down in the dumps of like, this is so tiring. This is so hard. Like if my work is being at the racetrack, then I'm so blessed. And again, like also pulling inspiration from our team and the other projects that they've been working on, and still having those moments of wanting to put our hands up. So we just shot the Red Bull car launch that you saw yesterday. Like our team was in New York doing that. And those are those moments where I pull inspiration from my own team and, you know, putting my hand up and saying, hey, if we're doing more Red Bull stuff, I want to be on it. Stuff like that. So that was like all over the place about recent projects, but Daniel Ricciardo, going to Austin, seeing what our team is doing with Red Bull, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and something else that you mentioned too is, I think there's always going to be a time in your life that you're going to be doing work that you don't necessarily want to do, but those are also the experiences that you learn the most. And you're not going to, well, A, be as grateful for the good moments as you are as when you're looking back on other things, but B, I found that a lot of the projects that I was thrown on very early in my career, I had worked for a $9 billion beauty company. I was one of 4 women running the entire communications department for this massive global beauty company. And at first I was like, what the heck did I sign up for? Because this is like an insane amount of work and I'm fresh out of college. And I was like, I felt so out of my depth. But in those times and in those few years, I feel like I learned so many skills that I was able to transfer then over to any other role that I worked. It didn't have to be in beauty, it could have been anywhere else. So are there any skills that you think that you've learned in the last year or so, 10 months that you said, that you think transfer to your schoolwork or transfer to other parts of your life?
That's a good question. And it makes me think of the way that you said, like kind of being thrown into the fire to just feel it out. One of the sayings that I remember sitting in the Daniel Ricciardo party afterwards, one of our, I think he's like our lead creative producer, his name is Ryan Davis. He said, the way that we work at Race Service, it's like, you know, cooking a lobster. We're going to put you in a pot and we're going to turn up the heat and we're going to keep turning it up until you need a bit of a breather. We all have to put our hand up and turn down the heat sometimes. But the way that you become great is you sit in that pot and you turn the heat up and you turn the heat up and you turn the heat up. And so they really do believe in throwing you into the fire. So I had those moments. I found out don't know, 3 days before we went to Austin, that I was going to Austin. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know what my job is. You're telling me to find a tent? Okay, I guess I'm going to start Yelp reviewing all these wedding tent vendors and find one. So I've definitely had those moments. In terms of what I've learned that can translate, I feel like it's not necessarily a set skill, but it's learning to trust in yourself and know that you will find the solution. And if you can take a moment to take a really deep breath and clear your mind and bear down, there's a solution to be found, and you will find it. So I had those moments at work where it's like, this is not possible. They're out of credentials. I can't make more credentials pop up out of nowhere. Daniel's wine isn't going to arrive on time. It's not released. We can't go buy it. What are we going to do without it? Stuff like that, where working with people who have worked in this industry for years and getting to watch them and see how they problem solve definitely translates to, even if I'm sitting at a coding problem and I get super frustrated and I don't know what to do, and I have to take a moment to like get a tea, take a breath, and be like, I've done much harder things. There is a solution. I will find it if I just keep Googling or reaching out to resources. I would say the other thing that I've learned at school or at work that's translated so strongly to school for me, again, isn't so much of a skill, but a mindset. And this was summed up really well by a NASCAR exec that I was talking to the other day. But it's, don't change yourself to make yourself more palatable to other people. So I learned that a lot working within the industry, within the paddock. Your instinct might be, especially if you're a woman, to want to be one of the guys and to blend in and to make yourself more palatable. And pretty early on, I kind of grounded myself and learned that that was the easy way out. And you can't be authentic, and you can't grow exponentially when you're limiting who you really are. And I've noticed a shift within myself ever since I went back to school after being at race service, even in things like what I wear to class. Like I'm not thinking as much about what are people going to think if I show up, wearing X, Y, and Z graphic t-shirt and sweatshirts and all of that. I'm more focused now on authentically representing myself the way that I want to. And it also just makes you more confident in claiming the work that you're doing. And if I present a research report now, especially if it's in motorsports, I kind of have that ethos behind me that I can back up what I'm saying. And so again, not a skill, but the mindset of present yourself authentically, because that's the only way that you are going to be able to grow without any sort of inhibition, and really make deep, long-lasting connections with people the more that you authentically show yourself and authentically tell your story.
I love that so much. And I think there's my great point. I think that's so interesting. And I think, and I'm speaking for myself here, I work in a pretty male dominated space. It's finance, and it's so easy to be able to like, just mold yourself after what you see, or just become what's surrounded by you, or what you are surrounded by. Sorry. And it's really about like, well, they hired me, I was not imprinted by anyone surrounding me in this office when they hired me. They hired me for a reason. And I just recently got feedback in a performance review where I was like, for instance, you talk about taking a beat and taking a T. One was like, you get so passionate about projects and work that, a colleague had said, just go for a walk, just take a stress walk. And I told my manager as a rebuttal, I was like, well, yeah, what, I think I do need to like skip a beat, need to take like, just sit down and like, or go for a walk, or, get a little detached. It's just, and she's like, no, she's like, I hired you because of the passion that you have. And she's like, forget what other people say. You're not hurting anyone. It's not, nothing's happening, but, be you. And that was like, it gave me, not that it gave me authority. I should really find that within myself, but I was like, it gave me license to like lean into a little bit more of who that is and what that is. And so I think, Emma, what you're really doing to tie this all together, if you're showing up authentically, if you are, backed by this confidence, it'll allow other women to do that as well. And, other male colleagues as well, new interns and whatever. It affects everyone. And I think where I'm transitioning this question is that, contrary to popular belief, a lot of people seem to think that like motorsport is heavily male dominated. And while it is, while the majority is men, Sarah, Melissa, and I, and you yourself, we see the women there. They're just not front facing. So can you share a little bit more about the numbers? Like, what have you seen in your studies? What have you seen with your own eyes about the women that are in motorsport?
Yeah, I mean, this data is definitely hard to find for good reason. Teams don't want to share the numbers because the numbers don't look good. And so it's really early on, but some of the rough numbers that I can share is things like within F1 specifically, we see overall staff for teams, their female percentage is well under 10% most of the time. The best team that I've seen will have a 9% total female track team or female staff in general. And then when you get to trackside staff, that dwindles significantly. You're looking at 4%, maybe 5% per team. And very often they're working within the communications department, which I'm like, I say break in wherever you have to break in. Like I would happily work in communications for a team. Where I've been finding a lot of inspiration lately is in work with NASCAR and realizing that I had this stereotypical belief and view of NASCAR, I would say, is kind of this like redneck Southern motorsport series that is, more discriminating against people of color, women, than you would expect Formula One to be. And I have to say, working within NASCAR, kind of been blown away by how progressive they are. I'm working with 2 female account leads. Like when has that happened that my 2 main points of contact on an account are both female and also both named Amy, which is a fun coincidence. But even, I think it was 2 nights ago, I was invited to this event by WISE, which is Women in Sports and Events. They have a great LA chapter and it was called NASCAR 101. And the 4 people that were interviewed were the director of NASCAR Digital, so the director of all things NASCAR, social media, content that is getting fed out to networks, things like that. The general counsel for NASCAR, who is a female who has worked with the company for almost 30 years. The president of the Chicago race, who's a female, led Daytona Rising, revitalized the Phoenix Raceway. And then the senior vice president of marketing and partnerships, who again, her first job was NASCAR and she's been with that company for 30 years. And it was one of those moments of like, even I have to pull myself out of that stereotype of NASCAR is more progressive than half of the other teams that I've seen and I've worked with. But I do think within motorsports, teams are working more generally to match what their messaging may be about diversity and inclusion, to not just present that towards their fans, but to also reflect that internally within their teams. And I mean, I can't name specific teams, but there certainly are teams that have internal programs that are all about hiring and promoting women from within and making sure that we have equal representation within the teams. It's a very long way to go, but they certainly do exist within the industry and within the paddock. You just you need to find them and you need to give them the platform to speak, which I think organizations like Grid Clique are doing. And you do find so many women within the paddock that are being more vocal, because the way to get women into the paddock is to show women in the paddock, right? We go where we see ourselves in communities. And so it's always uncomfortable to be one of the first people to feel like, okay, I'm looking through Instagram photos of this car meetup. I don't see any women, but the more that you see there and the more that you have pictured, the more that you feel comfortable being there. So giving platforms to women in motorsports definitely will help, push that tide. And I always say it's not about taking over a men's sport. It's not about replacing jobs. This isn't a zero-sum game of power between genders when it comes to motorsport. It's about the fact that when it comes to the passion of motorsport, when it comes to the biological needs of a lot of these roles, we can do the exact same job. We've been redlined from it historically, and we just haven't been shown the access points to it. And so the more that women break into it and show how they broke into it, the easier it'll be for us to get in there.
And to what extent do you feel like, obviously we talk a lot about Drive to Survive and how, especially in the US, it had a huge impact on the growth of F1. But to what extent do you also feel like fans and the fact that the fan base is also a lot more diverse, it's younger, there's more women, there's more people from all over the world. How do you feel like that's also impacting just the community in general and people who might start watching F1 at a very young age and be, oh my God, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a driver. To what extent, do you feel that can be driven by the fan community as opposed to just maybe those teams trying to implement quotas or things like that?
Oh, I think
Great question.
I would say the kind of to me, it's been a two-step process of how this community has grown to be so much more diverse and inclusive. And it started with Drive to Survive. So the way that I always explain, or I like to explain the Drive to Survive effect, is you take a sport that historically you have to be grandfathered into, or somebody has to explain it to you. You make it accessible and you teach people about it. So you're bringing it to a younger generation who likely didn't have a family that grew up watching it, maybe doesn't understand the sport, doesn't feel comfortable with a lack of knowledge. So you introduce people to the sport. And then by introducing people to the sport, we transition to the second phase of giving more power to the teams, drivers, and fans through social media. So what Drive to Survive has really empowered, and Tony talks about this a lot, is the drivers to be a lot more powerful within their own teams, within their own brands and marketing. When you build out these younger fan bases that have so much untapped purchasing power, you're giving that power to the drivers through social media. And so you're making the drivers sometimes be in a more powerful position, or at least a more influential position than F1 itself, the teams. And you see the opposite in NASCAR. And we talk about this a lot with NASCAR, of their league, their series itself, the NASCAR Instagram will always have more followers than the NASCAR drivers. And that's, the polar opposite in F1. People in F1 follow the series for specific drivers often. And you see the opposite in NASCAR. You follow it because of the league, and then you may pick up your own favorite driver. So it's definitely growing and changing for the different series in different ways within America. But I do think that Drive to Survive and giving fans that increased power through social media is helping us push our way, even by empowering people to find job applications, right? Like Mercedes might not be putting out a diversity-based job application, but because there are so many organizations like Grid Clique popping up, or motorsport jobs that were kind of created by this Drive to Survive rush and this new interest, you're providing people more access points to find those jobs, right? So you had the transition of more eyes on Formula One, translates to more power within social media for the fans, translates to more access points for those jobs, for, being a Silverstone monitor and things like that. Those entry points that often you only found if you were already grandfathered into the sport, if you came from a family who watched Formula One, if you came from a karting family, stuff like that. So I think it definitely is led by fans, and it's powered greatly by fans, again, and people like Grid Clique, that want to translate just passion for a sport and something that you like to watch to, here are ways that you can work in the sport, you can find jobs. And I think teaching people to have the confidence to do things like send a cold cover letter is really the way that you turn the tide and you kind of break that glass ceiling.
Something else that you mentioned as well that I think is super important is, well, obviously the Drive to Survive effect on impacting fans and calling for more diversity, as Maureen said. But I think what else it's doing that I'm starting to see, similar to what you said about NASCAR, is people have gotten into Formula One through Drive to Survive, and then they're kind of hitting this point of like, okay, we're seeing Formula One drivers like Romain Grosjean go to other series. Maybe I should watch that other series. Or we see Kimi Räikkönen race in that NASCAR race last year. Excuse me. So I'm going to watch that race. And then they're shown different kinds of motorsports and different worlds. And I was like you. I always thought that NASCAR and American-based racing was very like, oh, America, freedom, Eagles, which is like not my vibe. And so I went to my first IMSA race this past week in the 24 Hours at Daytona, and my world was shocked. Like how just incredible a 24-hour race is like one thing, but B, the amount of women and diversity I saw in the pit boxes blew my mind. Like there's 61 cars, there are 61 pit boxes, and you walk down this one long pit lane, and you can look into each of it. They're basically tents in the pit lane, and you look into each of these tents, and every single tent I was seeing at least 50% were women or people of color. And I was seeing women in fire suits just running around all weekend, and it just completely blew my mind as to like what racing could be. And that's because I had a very naive mindset of, I really just watched Formula One. I started watching IndyCar a little bit last year, but not really. So it's about learning about a sport that you love and then being able to branch off and learning other things as well. So I'm like a total endurance fan now. I'm now going to start, I became really good friends with the NASCAR driver while I was there because he was a spotter. And now I'm going to like start watching NASCAR. And so it's all these things that, being able to see that representation now that I've seen that there's all these incredible women working in IMSA. And I even met a girl that she does the PR and marketing for the Iron Games, which is an all-female team, as well as Ramon Grosjean, because she works for an agency. And she's like born and raised in Miami. And I was like, I didn't know that people born and raised in Miami can go and like work in these things. Like, again, just seeing that representation is so cool, and something that I think will just hopefully continue to grow with this rise of social media and racing in general.
And I actually have something to add on. When I went to Indy last year, what I saw, because it's very like NASCAR, very liberal. You can walk around the pit and everything. The different ages. Like I saw much more older people working in the crew, moving things around, older women, which I thought was like, I was like, when I retire, I want to start working in Indy. Like sign me up with a team. And I think also that's great representation. Like, you know, it's just, we think of it as such a young person's sport. Like you need to be fit, you need to be look a certain way to work in this space. But like I was so inspired to see older individuals, like maybe older than my parents, and I'm not going to reveal their age, but I was like, this is so cool. Like it just felt like, and they're all eating together, and they're all like, it was, I don't know. I thought if you think of like race, age, like gender, it was very, these other series are much more inclusive.
Yeah, and back to the, you know, the Drive to Survive effect and the real impact it has. It's been interesting to see, as Sam and Sarah have shared their experiences at other kinds of races, that it's not just, you know, you watch Drive to Survive and the impact it has on the F1 sport, but also like you, Emma, you know, someone who starts maybe in government or starts in investor relations or, you know, starts in other functions. You have the skills, it's just transferring it now to a different industry. And it's going to be interesting to see over the next few years the long-term impact of, you know, just one Netflix show on an entire industry.
Yeah, I do think a lot of the fear that comes from working in motorsports is this idea that you have to be so technically trained to work, right? So the idea you have to be an engineer, you have to be a mechanic, you have to be a race strategist, something like that. And it's a trap that we can't risk falling into, right? There's so many other ways to get involved, and realizing that you can easily transfer your life skills into these jobs is so key. I mean, I was describing to you guys a little bit before the live started that my job this week is basically to be putting fires out. Like what I'm doing is running around trying to solve all of these problems. And those are skills that I learned from like growing up in a family and working in government, where there's PR crises that pop up and you're driving to get a political candidate from, you know, campaign stop A to campaign stop B. Like you're pulling from your life skills to work in this industry, and this narrative that you have to be a trained engineer or, you know, anything like that, you have to be a graphic design artist is so far from the truth. What I think it really takes to work in motorsports is to be comfortable, kind of, you know, to borrow a motorsport term, putting your elbows out and being comfortable pushing yourself to the forefront of these groups and doing things like sending cold emails. And, you know, it's a privilege, but flying to LA for the week or for the day and doing a group interview. It's all about putting your elbows out there, representing yourself authentically, and making it clear that as a person, you're going to make an impact in this organization. And, you know, that doesn't require being a mechanical engineer.
In the last 6 minutes that we have, I just want to reiterate to anyone who's tuned in with us live, if you want to ask Emma any questions, you can drop them in the chat below. But I think a good way to kind of segue here is, what races do you think that we'll be able to see you at this year?
There's a lot that I'm hopeful about. So if things work out my way and the race service way, hopefully Miami will be the next one, potentially Montreal. Hopefully Austin again, and then the big fingers crossed is Vegas. So hopefully the domestic F1 races plus Montreal. I'm so close that it's like, it's an hour and a half drive from where I live in New Hampshire. So that's, you know, send the good vibes to the race service team, leave comments on our Instagram, but hopefully I will get to see everybody in Miami.
That is amazing. So last couple questions here, unless anyone else wants to interject. I think if you could share with some of like the projects that you're currently working on, and also what do you think motorsport needs more of, and what do you think it needs less of?
Yeah, so I think some of the stuff that I can tease without going into too much detail is, I can point out Charles Leclerc specifically. We've been doing a lot of work with him. So if you've seen his 24 Hours of Monaco vlog, that was, ideated, captured, produced, edited by the amazing race service team. The content that was just filmed of him training in the Dolomites and his YouTube training video for that was all done by race service. So obviously can't share any car noises. Can't share any of the concrete plans for Charles, but I think there's a lot coming there, and there's a lot coming from drivers who understand the value of the creator economy and are positioning themselves to really fill the void of maybe somebody like Daniel, who may be taking a step away from some of those brand relationships. I would say similar things for Red Bull. Keep an eye on Red Bull. I think they're definitely wanting to level up their content, and hopefully we're partnered with them for a lot of it. And then in terms of what F1 needs more of and needs less of, this is like maybe not a clear-cut way of answering. I think one of the things that it needs more of is authentic community-based activations and integrations that are led by authentic community leaders. So if we're popping up in Austin, right, like we should be having authentic community integrations led by the Latinx community, right? Like we're taking over their spaces. It's ridiculous for us to come in like the traveling circus and take over their city without authentically engaging with city leaders, with activist communities there. So I think F1 would grow so dramatically and would also be more accepted by American fans who see it as this kind of posh European unaccessible sport if they are authentically working with communities and integrating within those communities. In terms of what it needs less of, I would say, kind of touching back on what we spoke about earlier, less of people who are fitting into the box of what they think should be somebody who works in motorsports or is making themselves more palatable to fit the image of a traditional person working in motorsports. So more authentic culture integrations, more people kind of authentically and brazenly embracing who they are, and less of feeling like you have to fit in and be a specific person to fill a role.
And I think a lot of those points go across industries, not just F1, but we kind of want to be able to see that in all these different kinds of activations or things that people are doing. I do want to ask a question that Saeem put in the chat here. So it says, being based out of LA, which is a big creator hub, do you have any thoughts on the evolution of motorsport being amplified by the creator economy?
Yeah, I think, this touches on what we just spoke about, which is those authentic integrations. So you have the two streams of the creator economy of just motorsport creators who do a lot for the community, but often work on spreading information and knowledge within the existing fan base of motorsport. And then you have the external diverse people who come in as creators who already had an established fan base and are exposing their new fans to motorsport. So somebody like Jack Cook on TikTok, who is a close friend of Race Service, who is known for just doing cool stuff around LA, when he pops up at Race Service events or at races or, being with Alpine in Austin, that's really when you can tap into this creator kind of market and creator economy to authentically share those experiences with fans who trust Jack because they know that Jack is just trying to find cool things to do and share with his fan base. So I think motorsport is heavily reliant on the creator economy to grow and to reach new fans at this point. Teams wouldn't have entire departments built on social media strategy if that wasn't the case. I think the big transition point that we should be looking towards, though, is teams and drivers and, sponsors in general starting to realize the purchasing power behind social media fans. And I think once they realize that and once they tap into catering to the needs of social media fans, not just in TikTok trends or in the photos they're posting, but in merchandise, in ticket packages, things like that, you really are going to see this kind of tidal wave of the power of social media fans just absolutely explode.
I think it's really cool also, like just thinking about like different audiences. Red Bull they did a little segment yesterday on their livery launch of Mr. Doodle, was it? Mr. Doodle, right?
That was shot and edited by some amazing editors at Race Service.
Oh, well, there you go.
Just to throw that plug in there. But I mean, like you were saying, it's such a cool moment to authentically integrate with the fan base in the United States.
There you go. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take it. I just got so excited when I heard about the Mr. Doodle thing. I immediately was like, that's so awesome that Red Bull is actually gonna tap into their fan base.
I think it's sick. And like, I think Sarah and I had a chat in Clubhouse days where we talked about the livery releases being quite like a lot of pageantry, basically. I'm like, that was here, you're integrating art. Like there's so many intersections of motorsport touching, you know, politics, touching like it just makes sense that art is not brought in. And like, and then if you expand that to think about new fan acquisition and new viewer acquisition, like this is the way you go. You dip into these, you know, verticals or these channels and you bring that viewership over. So I think that's, just like immediate example right there.
And I will say, I don't think that the FIA and F1 is doing a good job of that. I think that they are tapping into these new fan bases in spite of themselves to some extent. I think where you're seeing that happen is outside organizations like ESPN coming into the paddock and the teams itself. I think F1 is actually trying to limit the cross-cultural moments, which is crazy to me. But I think, again, the more that we see social media giving power to drivers and teams is the more that we see these crossover moments. So I'm super invested in seeing how this political conversation ban will work out in F1. Because I think, frankly, F1 and the FIA will have no power coming from a fan base to limit that. And it'll be really interesting to see if we kind of hit a fever point of the fans all banding behind drivers and teams who want to speak openly and kind of shunning the FIA about it.
And then I just have one more thought because I know we're also at time, but you know, you had mentioned that a lot of the women are in the communication roles, and you know that encompasses social media and marketing and stuff. But like, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if social media has been identified as an area in which to get fan acquisition and, you know, sort of money coming in. Like it's probably women pitching those projects. You know, different perspectives, diversified thinking brings in new ideas, which brings in money, and you could test, you could find out, you know, and it brings you money. So I would never, you know, we got some flack from people when we posted our podium report being like, well, women are just in like communication roles. And it's like, how are people going to find out about your brand? How are you going to amplify your brand without communication, marketing, social media? So there you go. That's my soapbox pitch.
Also, that's just not true.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, it's just not. But like, you know, if we want to go talk about the numbers, like, sorry, you know, women are in these roles and they are bringing in money and they're finding other ways to bring in money. So,
and I think there's a lot of power behind that and realizing that it isn't just social media, right? I take a lot of power and a lot of joy being like the mathematician of race service. Like I think to somebody who's approaching race service, I don't think that they would assume that there's any kind of strategist in the building or somebody focused on the numbers. It would be like the youngest female in the room. But there's a lot of joy in kind of surprising people and being like, okay, you want a social media strategist? Here's Emma, who is trained in data analytics and, you know, works in social media, but works in social media because you're expanding your branding and the revenue that you're getting from sponsors. And it's all about rejuvenating your image and playing the long term for how you're going to set yourself up for success within your series. And then also really what you're doing after, because, you know, we can't drive forever. And that livelihood is entirely based on sponsorships and marketing, which is increasingly seen almost only through social media.
And also like consumer behaviors, right? Like there's some psychology behind it as well. Like, anyways, I'm gonna keep going and like just Emma, we could talk afterwards. I think this is just absolutely fascinating. Does someone want to close off? Because I gotta take a stress walk.
I feel like we could go on for hours on this because you're bringing up such important topics. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what everyone on this call knows, which is fans have the power now. It's a very different ball game than it was even 10 years ago. So I'm really excited to see you be a part of that. And yeah, for us to keep exploring what that looks like.
Yeah, we are obviously past time, so thank you, Emma, for being past with us. I'm going to quickly show this comment from Jacob from earlier in the conversation because, I mean, I think that is just summarizes everything here. But can you just end off with telling us where people can find you, follow you, race service, your schoolwork, your thesis, all the above?
Yeah, so to plug race service on Instagram, it's race.service. We share a lot of BTS content if you want to see what it's like to put together a launch. Same thing on TikTok. And then for me personally, my Instagram is just my full name, so Emma.Elsbecker. Try to share BTS content on there. I also have a TikTok account called The Formula One Nation that has been slipping because my priority is school and job, and then if I have time to make TikToks. But those are most of the places you can find me. I'm definitely most responsive on Instagram, and I'm always down to connect and chat with people there.
Okay, cool. We also have her Instagram linked below. I will add her TikTok link, and I will add the race service link if it's not already there. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Maureen, for joining us. I know that like this has been like a wild ride of an hour and it always goes by so quickly. But it was a full house today, and we love that. So thank you both for being here with us. And thank you especially, Emma, for telling us your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.